We are talking 2012's 100 Ghost Street, the return of Richard Speck, also known as Paranormal Entity 4, The Awakening. Now this is a found footage movie produced by The Asylum. I should explain the Paranormal Entity 4 title. This is actually a kind of series of unrelated films that have kind of been packaged as a kind of faux series of films to really compete with the Paranormal Activity movies. So 100 Ghost Street, this focuses on a crew of kind of ghost hunters who are trying to document this mass killer who once was resided in this kind of large building, which was apparently some type of like hospital college, and it was the site of like a massacre, and it's been long since abandoned. So they've got kind of permission to stay in there for one night and document everything. They have to agree to be locked in there to sort of prevent kind of vagrants getting in and things. So they do, and inevitably there of course is the spirit in there, a very violent, murderous, rapist spirit who starts picking off our individuals from this kind of ghost hunting crew. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So as I mentioned, this movie is actually produced by The Asylum, who of course famous really for doing these kind of mockbusters. And although I suppose this really is a mockbuster, when you kind of obviously compare it to the likes of the Paranormal Activity films, which were kind of going strong at this time, The Asylum does do the occasional okay horror film, I would say, and they've done a few sort of found footage movies, and because of the nature of a found footage movie, where it's obviously it's conducive to doing it on a low budget, I think The Asylum movies like that end up being somewhat kind of watchable, because most found footage movies are, for the most part, kind of low budget. You know, you're not having giant kind of Godzilla rip-offs or Transformers rip-offs. You can do things on a kind of a low budget here and it still look okay. And I will say this movie plays a lot like Grave Encounters, if you are familiar with that sort of that movie. It's a similar kind of setup. You know, we have these group of kind of paranormal investigators locked in this kind of facility, which apparently doesn't have fire exits. I mean, I always think these when people get in these large buildings and stuff, they never seem to have fire exits. Which I know I'm from the UK, but I'm sure the building codes are probably same in most countries. You must have, you know, a certain amount of fire exits and stuff, but these buildings never seem to. Anyway. Let's talk about what I think works. So again, because of the nature of found footage, the low budget, it works. But I will say what is impressive in this movie is the location. It looks like it's genuinely been filmed in some type of abandoned location, because it looks run down, it looks dilapidated, and you know, very much looks like a kind of a genuine kind of haunted or at least abandoned sort of hospital or some sort of facility kind of like that. So I think it's a good fit for this kind of the actual subject of the film. There's even a couple of instances where I think that the actual film crew may have even put themselves in a little danger. There's a film which looks like there's a lift shaft, an elevator shaft, which has been abandoned. It's full of water, and it looks like they're actually like looking down the shaft and things. I'm thinking that looks like a real elevator shaft, which has got water down the bottom, like a one that's been deactivated. I'm thinking that's, you know, you could easily kind of fall down there. So there is a degree of this location really being quite kind of authentic looking, I will say, and that does kind of, I think, give this movie a sense of somewhat kind of realism, and that's obviously conducive to, again, the found footage aesthetic there. So that's pretty good. The actual setup is nothing you haven't kind of seen before, but it's a sort of a reasonable kind of setup for this kind of style of movie. There seems to be a good swathe of sort of characters. It doesn't spend too much time sort of really introducing us to them, to be honest. So some of them do feel like you don't really know who they are, but I think you get to know the face of this kind of this female presenter called Jackie, the kind of the director, who's very much kind of like a barking orders all the time, things like this. So you get to know kind of a few of them. And there's an interesting idea, which I don't know if it fully worked in regards to the kind of the spirit here, because it kind of acts a little bit like a predator from the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, The Predator. We have a situation where it seems that we have a entity, shall we call it, running around like a guy, not like floating around, running around, but he's invisible apart from when you kind of look through this camera, and he kind of makes these kind of clicking noises. So it kind of feels like you're really running away from a predator, and he feels more corporeal. There's for example, there's a scene where he's on a bed and you can see the bread to press and things like that. So it doesn't feel so much like a ghost, rather than it feels like a kind of like a more corporeal sort of entity that's sort of similar to a predator in some ways, which is interesting, but maybe not quite as scary as maybe more of your classic kind of style garden variety sort of haunting movies. There's a couple of reasonable gore shots in this movie as well, I will say. What doesn't work in this movie? I mean, it's a very much cookie cutter plot in regards to, you know, we've seen it all before. It doesn't really try to do anything new, and there are sort of plots within the kind of the movie, or kind of things that happen that seem to be only exist for to either split our party up so they can kind of get picked off. They don't seem like they would be kind of like a reasonable kind of thing that people would do. For example, there's a sequence where there's like some bolt cutters downstairs. They send one guy while the other 4 people kind of wait for him, and of course, you know, the one guy gets kind of taken out. I'm thinking, well, if you didn't want to all go, which would have been the sensible thing, at least split up into 2 groups, you know. But no, because, you know, the movie needs to kind of get them separate and things like that. So there's a few instances of very much like that. Even when our group are trying to stay together, they still kind of like, one walks like way ahead and then the kind of door shuts and you get sort of trapped, things like that. So there's kind of lots of sort of elements here that you just sort of see that are made to progress the plot, rather than it being like, oh, that's what happened in a kind of a natural way. It's like, this guy needs to be walking like 20 feet ahead so he can kind of get separated, when in reality you would kind of stick pretty close and stuff. And there's also a kind of a somewhat kind of fakeness to it, despite I think the location doing a lot of heavy lifting for this movie. You know, some of the way that, for example, the camera just happens to kind of like fall, and kind of the framing, it looks more like it's, you know, it's set up. It looks more like it's, you know, we needed this shot to kind of look this certain way. And although it makes for a better looking film in some respects, it doesn't really make it look like it's a genuine sort of found footage movie. It's like the way these cameras are kind of like positioned and held a few times. You know, again, it doesn't feel quite authentic. It feels kind of a little bit set up and a little bit kind of fake. There's a bit of fakeness to this movie. I think the acting is okay, but as I've mentioned, I feel like some of the characters here are pretty much non-entities. We really don't know much about them. They all seem somewhat interchangeable, really, I would say, apart from maybe the director and the kind of like the female sort of main star. Even our sort of our main sort of main characters, ultimately, I really didn't feel like I'd not got to know them. And as I mentioned, the kind of entity, our antagonist, I don't think really worked. It kind of it felt a little goofy, if you ask me. So overall, this movie is okay. I mean, it's an okay for a silent movie. It's okay for a found footage movie. The location does a lot of work for this movie, but I don't think it really excels in any way. But it's not a bad film. It's like it's an okay looking kind of found footage film. It's just a huge found footage movie, and you kind of love consuming that kind of medium, and you like the kind of Grave Encounters style films, then watch it. But it's going to be one you'll somewhat enjoy, but you won't kind of ever want to watch it again or remember it really in a couple of months' time. So I'll give this one a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time.